Once again, hello everybody. In this video, we're going to start taking a more in-depth look into the Mercury SR2. You'll see that I've actually stuck the OLED display from my Mercury SR2 just to the side of my LCD screen on my PowerBox Core radio. So we can sort of have a look at both screens in real time. We're going to start off very basic, because some people get confused when they're basically assigning all the servos and the flight services to the Mercuries. They get confused when they try and set up the gyro, and you hear of people setting up the gyro, then you've got flight services responding incorrectly, etc, etc. So this topic will require a number of videos. We're going to start off with the real basics and then move over to the more advanced stuff. So for instance, if you've got a jet with vectored thrust or multiple servos on the one flight surface, we're going to cover all that in a number of these videos, all pertaining to the Mercury SR2. And of course, these videos are also applicable to the PowerBox Competition SR2, the Royal SR2 as well, because basically they're the same devices, just with a few extra features, but the basic programming functions are pretty much identical. Okay. What I've done in my core, I've set up a very basic aircraft. So I've got throttle on channel 1, I've got 2 aileron servos on channels 2 and 3, I've got a single elevator servo on channel 4. I've left channel 5 free because I want to add a second elevator servo for a more complex example in a later video. I've got a single rudder servo on channel 6, I've got a gyro gain control which is on my rotary control on channel 10. Got a capacity reset function. So with these PowerBox units, they can display battery capacity, and you need a way of resetting it. So whenever you charge your batteries and you then switch on your model, you want to reset the capacity back to normal. So I've just set up a momentary switch, and that's active on channel 16. I have a sequencer function set up. It was just basically just a switch to activate the sequencer in the PowerBox Mercury. And then I've got some vectored thrust channels which we will be using at a later stage. At the moment they're just disabled, they're not assigned to any control function. Okay, let's start off by entering the basic menu of the Mercury SR2. So as users are probably no doubt aware, I won't bother showing you this, but you actually enter the menu from the power switch. So you hold down the power button, let it go, and then we're into the main menu, as you can see there. So the first item is the iGyro. Now in this video we're not going to be covering the iGyro, so I don't have an iGyro connected, but we will be adding one at a later video, and I'll show you how to set that up from scratch. Okay, moving on to the next item, we've got servo matching. Again, not covered in this video, but we will be covering that in a later chapter or a later video. Same with the sequencer, that'll be sort of a separate topic on its own. We've got input mapping, I'll refer to that later. Then we've got output mapping, same goes for that. And we've got a basics menu. And then we've got the assistant. So the assistant is a handy menu for those that are sort of new to this system. I recommend people use a setup assistant, and we will be covering that probably in the second video. There's a reset function if you want to reset back to factory defaults, and then we scroll around to the exit menu function. Okay, I'll just go into the basics menu. So this menu is really the first menu that you should enter to set up some basic functionality for the PowerBox units. So let's enter the basics menu. Okay, now you'll notice at the top it talks about the TX system. So as most users are aware, these PowerBox units are not only compatible with PowerBox, they are also compatible with Spectrum, JR, Futaba, multiplex, whatchamacallit, Jetty, that's the one I was thinking of, Jetty, good old Jetty. So there's a myriad of systems it does support. So at the moment I've got a couple of receivers plugged into it, and they're connected, bound to my PowerBox radio. So the default writing in there is P2 bus. because we use the P2 bus, as you're no doubt aware from other videos, to talk to the Mercury. And the Mercury then talks back to my transmitter using the P2 bus. So this parameter is not adjustable. It's just a display telling you or highlighting to the pilot what system is in use. So obviously if I had a Futaba system, it would show SBus2. In this case, like I said, we're using it on my PowerBox core, so I've got some PowerBox receivers plugged into it. So it displays the P2 bus. That's not user assignable, you can't change that. That's just what it's detected. Okay, moving on. Now, inbuilt into the Mercury, there's a regulator. So we can have 6-volt regulated DC going to the servos. We can also set it to 7.8 volts from memory. So if I actually enter that and change it, yep, 7.8 volts. And then we can scroll back to 6 volts. So we've only got the two options with the Mercury, 6 and 7.8. With the competition and the Royal, you do have an extra option. I think there's 7.4. I can't remember from the instructions, but there's 6 volts. Definitely it's got 6 volts. And then there's like 7.4 and 7.8. And then there's a regulator bypass function on those power boxes as well. Now in this case, I'll be using some cheap servos, so I'm going to leave it at 6 volts. Okay, frame rate. I suppose most of us are familiar with this setting. With digital servos, you can reduce the frame rate down to 12 milliseconds. This particular power box drops down to 12 milliseconds. I think my Pioneer that I've got in one of my aircraft, I think that drops down to 10 milliseconds. However, because I'm going to be using some old or cheap Futaba analog servos, I'm going to leave it at the default or the slowest 18 milliseconds. Now, battery type. This is important. The battery type affects the main display. So on the main display, you'll notice there's a voltage reading. But there's also a couple of bar graph indicators, like an analog display for your voltage. And depending on what battery type you have selected here, the bar graphs will change. So for instance, if we set, say, you've got a choice of lithium ion, life battery, lithium ferrite, nickel metal hydride. Depending on what setting you have here, the bar graph scaling changes. So you want to make sure you set the right battery type. Now at the moment I've got a couple of LiPos connected to it, so we're going to select LiPos. And then the capacity function. So at the moment I've set it to 1500. This is editable, so you can change this to pretty much whatever you want. I've got some old LiPos connected here. I've just set it to a default of 1500. If you set a reading here that's not 0, the capacity counter will count down to 0. So it'll start at, say, 1500 once we reset it, and then it'll count down to 0. If you switch the unit off mid-flight, so you land, you switch it off, you switch it back on, it remembers where it's at. So it'll count down from where it's at. So if your flight, say your first flight only takes, say, 300 milliamps, if you subtract 300 from 1500, that'll give you 1200 milliamps on the display. If you don't reset it, next time you switch it on, it'll start at 1200 and still keep counting down. So that's a real handy feature. Now, it's also got a secondary function. If you set 0 in here, it'll count up. So some people like to have the capacity count up, others like to count down to 0. So you have that option with the Mercury, the Competition and the Royal. The Pioneer can only count up from memory. I'm pretty sure there's no countdown feature on the Pioneer. And then the last option is the language, and I think you've only got the choice between German and English. And one thing I found out is that the system actually sends the language details from the transmitter along the P2 bus to the actual unit as well. So just be aware of that. Anyway, so that's pretty much the basic menu covered. It's fairly easy to set up. But yeah, I recommend going in there mainly for the battery type and setting your capacity. Now, let's go back to the main display. So let's exit out of this menu. Just get out of there, exit menu. So now we're back to the home or the main display. And you'll notice we've got the two voltage readings for the two battery inputs. We've got a little status indicator indicating there's two RXs connected, an RX1 and RX2. They're both okay. If you add a gyro, you'll get a gyro message in there as well. And also GPS, you'll get a GPS indication as well on the left hand side. We have two little values for the current, the actual real-time current being consumed. So at the moment I don't have any servos plugged into it. So you'll see there's about 40 milliamps on the left hand side and 50 milliamps on the right hand side of the screen. And you'll notice they'll vary a little bit, and that depends on what the actual battery voltage is between the two battery packs. So if one's a bit higher than the other, you'll get slightly different readings in the current being drawn on both sides. And that's just typical. And also just below the actual current reading, we have a capacity reading. So you'll notice we've got about just over 1,437 or whatever milliamp hours left in the batteries. So that's, remember how I told you you set that capacity to 1500. So it'll start at 1500 and count down. So while I'm talking away here, you'll notice that'll go down very, very slowly because we don't really have much of a load on it. So it will take some time. And then remember on my radio how I said we've got that capacity channel. So I've got a capacity reset function on channel 16. So all it is a simple channel I've set up from -100 to +100. If I hit the momentary button, you'll notice it'll change. So that's on. So in other words, that would be reset the capacity. That's off. So -100 is off, +100 is reset the capacity. However, I don't have it programmed into the Mercury at the moment. So it's not doing anything. So while the radio is transmitting that data on that channel, we're not actually getting a response from the Mercury. So what do we need to do to actually set that capacity feature? Well, go back into the main menu structure of the Mercury SR2, and if we go to the input mapping, so this feature is actually in the input mapping screen, and don't be scared, we'll be covering this input mapping menu in a lot more detail in another video. So let's enter this particular menu now. And you'll notice there's all these gyro settings. So this menu here is basically where we map the channels coming out of the transmitter to what channels we want the gyro to be active on. And I'll explain all this later. So anyway, if I scroll through this, and you'll notice we've got ailerons and then elevators, A, B, and C. So basically we've got three gyros per axis, basically. So in effect, you can have 3 channels per axis, I should say. So 3 on the rudder, 3 on the aileron, and 3 on the elevator. But again, I'll cover that in another video. So on this last screen, you'll notice there's a sequencer option. And what that does is allows to set the channel that we want the sequencer to be active on. If you look on my core display, if I go back into functions, I do have a switch set up for the sequencer for a later video, and I've set that to channel 12. So we might as well go ahead and set that now. So we just enter that, and then just basically you select whatever channel you want to use on the core or your atom. So in this case, we're going to use channel 12. And for the reset capacity, I'm going to use 16. So let's go down to reset capacity. Let's set that to 16. There we go, 16. Now let's exit that menu. Let's go back to the home screen so I can show you it in operation. So you notice now we've got a little bit of current being consumed. So we're down to what? 1494, 1495, something like that. If I push the button on my core transmitter, so let's go into the servo monitor screen. Well, actually even better, let's go to the actual channel so it's just a bit easier to see. So as soon as I hit the button on my radio, you'll notice the 2 little capacity counters will reset to 1500 milliamps. So let me press my button right now. And there you go, 1500 milliamps on the little display. And of course, that'll come up in the telemetry as well. So you notice here on my main home screen on my core, I've got 2 capacity widgets. So one for the capacity 1 for battery 1 and the other one for battery 2. And you'll notice I'll start counting down very, very slowly. Again, because I don't really have much of a load on it at this point in time, I'll take a bit of time to count down. So you'll notice one will count down maybe a little bit quicker than the other, so that's entirely normal. Maybe if I talk a little bit longer, the other one will come down a little bit as well. Maybe not. Let's see, if I hit my button again, we should see this go back to 1500 and reset to the starting point. So let's try that. So here we go, 1, 2, 3. There you go. Both back to 1500. Okay, easy as that. So that's fairly simple, real basic introduction to the menu structure of the Mercury SR2. One other thing I want to show you in this video before we move into the more complicated stuff is if we don't connect a gyro to the Mercury, you don't have a GPS connected and you just connect some servos to it, what features does it offer us? You know, what even if we don't even use any of the mixing functions within the Mercury as far as the gyro is concerned, what does it really do? Well, basically it allows us to connect servos to it, and it provides us with a dual redundant receiver system. It provides us with dual power feeds, so 2 truly redundant power feeds, and it allows us to connect servos to 16 of its ports. So let me zoom out so we can have a picture of the Mercury, and I'll plug in a few servos and let's see what we can do. Okay, sorry about this dodgy setup, but it's just a quick and simple setup just to show the connection of 2 servos at this point in time with no settings really set up in the Mercury. So I've plugged in this servo into port A, which is the first port on the Mercury, and this servo is plugged into port B, so in other words the second port. So the Mercury itself has 16 ports, and they're labelled A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way through to the letter P. So that gives us 16 ports. And if you don't run the assistant, basically channel 1 on your transmitter will appear on the first port. Channel 2 on the transmitter will appear on the second port, in other words port B. Channel 3 on the transmitter will appear on port C. So they call that like a direct connection. So I'll zoom into the display on the core and on the OLED display of the Mercury in a second. But we'll see how that's programmed in when we're not using a gyro. So one thing to remember, this is not when you're using a gyro. So if you're not using the gyro, you haven't set up the gyro, you haven't gone through the assistant, basically the ports are channels 1 to 16 directly connected from your transmitter to the servos. So at this point in time, the only thing the Mercury is really doing is providing us with a high current feed, a high current isolated feed to all the servos. So this servo here responds to channel 1. So my throttle stick, which is this one over here, is set up on channel 1, and we can quickly have a look in the functions menu. You'll notice throttle stick A is connected to channel 1, or is assigned channel 1, and if I move the stick, obviously the transmitter is sending a signal on channel 1, and that's coming out of port A on the Mercury here. So port A is basically channel 1. Port B has this second servo, and that's channel 2. So channel 2 has one of my aileron servos connected. So if I move the aileron stick, you'll notice the servo moves in response to the aileron stick. So that's channel 2 basically. If I hooked up a third servo into port C, basically channel 3, that would also respond to my aileron stick, because in my core I've assigned channels 2 and 3 to the one stick. And so on. So basically channel 4 will respond to elevator. I haven't assigned channel 5, so I won't do anything. Channel 6 is my rudder. And etc, etc. So at this point in time, all the Mercury is doing is just reflecting what my radio is transmitting. So channels 1 to 16 will appear on ports A through to P. Now let's have a look at the programming, how it's set up in the actual Mercury's display. So now looking at both displays, we've got the Mercury's OLED screen on the left there. I'll just keep the core screen in view for reference. So let's have a look where the programming is carried out for this, what they call direct channel allocation. So let's go into the menu of the Mercury, hold down the power button, and we need to go into the output mapping, not the input mapping, but the output mapping menu. And let's have a close look at these parameters. So you'll notice it says output A. So the first line says output A. And if we go in there, we can actually, oops, hit the wrong button. If we go in there, we can select, say, B, C, D, E, etc., all the way through to P. If you look at the next variable called function type, and this is where this direct function type comes into it. So this is called direct function. So when it's set to direct function, output A will pass through channel 1 from my core straight through to the servo. So basically channel 1 goes through the Pioneer, through the Mercury, but it's not impacted by any programming, by any gyro functions, etc., etc. There's no modification to the signal. It goes straight out the servo port. However, the Mercury does apply power to the servo, so the power bus, if you like, is beefed up. However, it's just straight through, so there's no modification to the signal coming from the radio. So this is what the direct function is all about. Now, let's move on to the third variable, and you'll notice it says direct 1. So what does this mean? Well, as you know, the ports on the Mercury are labelled from A to P. So as a default, they output the channels sequentially from 1 to channel 16, because you've got 16 letters of the alphabet there. However, you don't have to have channel 1 assigned to port A. You can assign whatever channel you like. So for instance, with my core, I have 26 channels to choose from. So if I wanted channel, I don't know, 15 on output A, so port A on the Mercury, I didn't want channel 1, I wanted channel 15. All you need to do is go into here and change it. So we can go to, say, you'll hear the servo moving because the different channels are set to different settings. If you set it to direct 15, output A now basically sends through channel 15 to the servo that's plugged into port A. So the default is 1, because A being the first one is channel 1. However, it can be whatever channel you like. And again, because with my core, I've got 26 channels to choose from, you can select, channel 26 if you like. So each individual port can be set to whatever channel you like. You can even set the same channel across multiple ports if you needed to do that for a particular reason. I'll just put it back to channel 1. And then you'll notice the last parameters, hold, fail. So this is your hold and fail safe, or fail safe and hold settings. And this is not programmed in the Mercury. It's actually programmed from the radio. So let's take a look at this. So we're on output A, and I've set it to back to channel 1. So I'm just moving my throttle stick. You can probably hear the servo that's connected to port A is moving up and down. At the moment it's set to hold, so if we lose both receivers, the Mercury will basically tell the servo to hold its position. However, you being a throttle, normally throttle was connected to, say, here, I might want to set the throttle to, say, 0 throttle or engine off. So I move my throttle stick all the way to the off position. I set the failsafe here on the core transmitter, but watch what happens on the display. So let's go into the failsafe menu. So let's say we want to set channel 1, which is a throttle, to failsafe. So I'll just push the failsafe option, and you'll notice the display now has changed to FS, indicating failsafe. And that's because the radio's told it to do that. And then we can say teach, it's teached, and then back to the normal menu item. And now you'll notice that hold fail is set to FS, whereas before it was set to hold. So that's actually programmed from your transmitter and not from the Mercury. Now this only applies to the PowerBox core radios, and I think also to the Jetty. I'm not sure about the Jetty, you might want to double check that. Otherwise you have to set failsafe up using the computer interface, the terminal program, if you're using, say, Fataba. But with the core and atom transmitters, they send the failsafe information along the P2 bus. So that's how the Mercury gets that information. It's just basically data transmitted along the P2 bus. So once again, if I go back to hold, let's cancel that. I'll say I want to go back to hold. Okay. And we'll notice here it's hold. This should actually go back to hold. And there it goes. A couple of seconds later, the data is transmitted to the unit. And that data is actually the failsafe information. When it's set to failsafe, it transmits it, I think every packet, every 10 millisecond packet. I could be wrong there, but it basically gets updated all the time as you're flying. Not that you'd change it in flight, but that's just how the system works. It's always sending that data to the receivers, and that data then ends up in the Mercury. Because remember, the failsafe function has to be handled by the Mercury, not the receivers. Because you could lose one receiver, but you don't want the system to go into failsafe. So one receiver might lose radio signal, but you don't want your whole plane to go into failsafe because you've only lost one receiver. So both receivers have to die, or both RX1 and RX2 signals have to disappear from the Mercury before the Mercury will invoke a failsafe scenario. Okay, that's enough on the failsafe. So all I really wanted to show you in this video is the fact that we can assign any port to any channel simply by going in here and just selecting the output or the port that you want to change. So for instance, if you wanted to do port B, just highlight port B so we can select port D, and you'll notice it automatically has set it to direct 2, which is channel 2. If we go to port C, it'll be direct 3, direct 4, direct 5. So these just correspond to the normal sequential channels. So direct 5 is channel 5 from the radio. However, like I said before, if you want port E not to be channel 5, you can just scroll down in here and change it. So we can make it channel 4, channel 8, whatever you like. Doesn't really matter. Oh, and one other thing is, again, with the PowerBox core radios, you can change it from your transmitter screen. So let's see what it looks like from the transmitter screen. So let's go to one of the Mercury widgets. Let's access the Mercury SR2's menu. Now remember, we don't have any gyro connected. So in here we've got some parameters we can change. You've got the firmware version, just letting you know what firmware you're up to. We can change the frame rate from here. So remember when we changed it on the actual display, well, you can do it from your transmitter. You can change the voltage that the regulator is set to. And this is the channel, that reset capacity channel, which is channel 16. So you can also set that from your transmitter. These are all gyro parameters. So I won't adjust these because they're just not required for this video, but we will delve into those later. This is the teaching the mounting position and the sticks for the gyro. So this menu basically tells the system which way the gyro sensor is mounted, whether it's rotated or not, whether it's facing backwards or not, or whether it's upside down, etc., etc. It also teaches the system your endpoints. So it has to know the end servo travels basically. So the gyro has to know how far to push the servos, or move the servo arms when it has to correct, so that you do that from within this menu. The input mapping, again, the input mapping is really only used when we set it up with the gyro. So when we assign basically servos to the gyro, you'll see some numbers in here pertaining to what channels are being mapped to what gyro function, whether it's, for instance, left aileron servo or right aileron servo. That's all done from within here. And again, the assistant will set this up for you as well. But again, we'll cover that off in another video. This is your gain, so you can set individual gains for the gyros or the gyro functions. So for instance, aileron A, B and C. Again, you can basically set up 3 parameters per flight surface. So in effect, you've got 3 gyro settings, if you like, per flight surface. Now, here we go. So you notice it's saying here, this is basically the same menu as this, except you notice the hold function is not within this menu, it's back in the function menu of the core. So you notice here we've got direct, so this is the function type, it's set to direct, so it'll pass, remember that'll pass the channels directly through to the servo, and this is the channel that it's responding to. So port E on the Mercury is going to output channel 5 from my transmitter. So if I wanted channel 6, I can just touch that. And you'll notice the display's changed to channel 6 as well. So let's do it again. Let's go to channel 7. So we've got direct 7, and you notice the display updates pretty much in real time as well. So again, you can do it from this display, or you can do it from the core's display. I mean, generally, once you set the aircraft up, you can even get rid of this display. You don't need this in your aircraft. Once it's sort of set up, because you can do everything from the screen on your Atom or core transmitter. Yeah, that's about it. All I needed to show you in this video. Short, sharp and sweet. In the next video I might cover, I think I'll go and cover the setup assistant and explain a few complications that there people get confused with, especially when they map the servos or select what servos and what functions. A lot of people get confused there, so I'll take my time and give you quite a few good examples. So hopefully in the second video that'll cover off a lot of confusion that some people get into when setting up these devices. Look, it's pretty easy, but yeah, if you haven't played with it much, it can be confusing. But you know, hopefully after you watch my second video, it'll make a lot of sense. This first video is just a real quick introduction, just to cover off some of the real basic stuff, and especially covering this output mapping with the direct function. So like we've got a couple of other functions. Like I said, we'll cover off these other functions in corresponding videos. So we've got this FS function type, and if you look at the screen now, it actually says gyro. So this FS, I'm not sure what the FS stands for. Richard might be able to help me out here. But basically it's to do with the gyro. So if you see FS on the screen on your core Atom, you know this is where you set your gyro function. So at the moment it's got right aileron set for port E. And there's also another one for the sequencer. So when you select sequencer, it basically ties up a port or 2 or 3, and those ports are then assigned the sequencer function. So back again to the direct function. So remember, direct, when you program a direct function, the channels go straight through to the Mercury or through the Mercury without really much modification and out to the servos. So in this case, if you set every port as a direct port, it's really, the Mercury is acting really just like a power expander and a redundancy unit for the RF path. But it's not doing anything as far as the gyro is concerned. There's no modification to the servo's functions as far as gyros or any of the flight surface type controls like your rudder, elevator. It doesn't sort of do anything. It's relying on the radar to do all that. Cool. Hopefully that explains this direct function. Anyway, that's enough for this video because I've probably rambled on too much already. Second video, maybe we'll look at like the setup insofar as, let me have a look on here. What's the quickest way? Oh, if I get out of the this menu, push the right buttons help. So we'll look into the get to the setup assistant. So let's have a real quick look before I run away. So here's where we set up the wing types. So like I said, with this direct function, we're not really setting up any wing types. We haven't set up any wing types. There's no vectored thrust setups or anything like that. There's no gyro setups. It's a real basic sort of connection, straight through connection, bit like a power expander. If you've ever used one of those PowerBox devices. However, in the next video, we're going to have a real good look at this menu in here. So yeah, stay tuned for the next video. We'll talk to everybody then. See you all.